Hi, everybody. Today we're getting right back into the Unit 3 Legislative Branch lecture notes. You have a test tomorrow, so just want to remind you to pay close attention to today's review, and we're going to finish up the last of the sections. So let's get into it. Things you need to know for the test. First and foremost, remember that the Congress is made up of both the House and Representatives. The House of Representatives and the Senate make up Congress. A member of the House is called a congressman. However, the Senate being more powerful, members of the Senate call themselves senators. So just keep that in mind. Congress is made up of two houses, and of course, they are the House of Representatives and the Senate. You also need to remember that all laws and acts are come to the House first, and they are introduced as a bill. What's the difference between a law? What's the difference between an act? Make sure you know that and understand that. Remember, a law is something you can and cannot do, and it comes with consequences. An act is something that Congress is going to do or provide. It is legislation, and just keep that in mind. Responsibilities Congress. You're a constituent, I'm a constituent. We are the people in which they represent. Political parties, uh, people who want to get elected and have similar ideas. Special interest groups, of course, make sure you understand that special interest groups, aka lobbyists, they basically buy votes, but they do often make the way between two groups of people. Between the different groups of Congress, between the Republicans and the Democrats, they usually work as an intermediary. So keep that in mind as well. A census is taken every 10 years. That is so that we can redistribute congressional seats into the districts. The last census was in 2010. We are currently taking a census right now. If your parents receive the census information, please make sure they fill it out. They can do it online this year. So it's real important to make sure that census information gets done so that we can keep our voting power for North Carolina in the House. Remember, all senators, each state gets two senators. So that doesn't make a difference as far as representation. But the House seats are delegated by population. So make sure you fill that out this year. Here's to take a look at a map from quite a few years ago, but just to give you an idea, the breakdown. Notice that North Carolina has 13, and we are listed as one of those ones who might be getting another seat in the House. So something that we need to be taking a close look at. That's going to up our numbers and up our ability to represent North Carolina. So make sure that census information gets filled out. Our House of Representative member for the Rockingham County area is Mark Walker. He is a Republican. He's a member of the Tea Party. He's been in office for a while. What are the things you need to know about representatives? Well, they serve for 2 years. Limits must be at least 25 years old. Have been a citizen for at least the last 7 years. If you notice there, if you do the math, you can't be a real citizen until you're 18 years old. So we're talking about people wanting to be naturalized. They can't be naturalized any earlier than 18 years old. So 7 years after 18 equals 25. There you go. There's the number. So 25 years old and must live in the state and within the district in which they represent. They got to know the people. The Senate has 100 members, two from each state, as we said earlier. Richard Burr and Thom Tillis both are Republicans. Of course, Richard Burr is a very important man. I told you about him. He's a head of several committees, so he's an important, powerful guy. Thom Tillis, not too bad either. He's an up-and-comer, so keep an eye on them. Senators are elected for 6-year terms. They have no limits, which means they can be in there forever, as long as you keep voting them in. They must be at least 30. Why? Responsibility. They must have that age for responsibility. That's why the Founding Fathers put that there. Must be a citizen for at least the last 9 years. That way they know the country well. And they must have lived in the state in which they are representing. Keep that in mind. Remember, they are also assigned to one of three classes. This is because you want to have at least 2/3 of your Congress meeting, your Senate meeting at all times so that bills can be passed and legislation can carry on, while 1/3 of the group is out running around for re-election campaigning. So just keep that in mind. Benefits, a whole slew of them. I went over all of those. The salary's pretty much not that much when compared to what most of these guys made before they became members of government. The 2 or more office, remember they enter into that lottery system. They might end up in the basement if they don't get their name pulled out correctly. Travel allowance, they do fly around a lot, but they don't fly first class anymore. Free gym membership. That is not a member to Planet Fitness. That is the congressional gym. That is for only members of Congress and their staff. So you have to be a member of the government to be able to go there. Healthcare, they get the gold-plated package. Pretty much, if they serve more than 2 terms, they get to take that package with them for the rest of their life, and we take care of them 100%. Free postage, that way they can mail their constituents. Who's a constituent? I'm a constituent. You're a constituent. Free parking in Washington, D.C. That's probably my favorite. It costs a lot to park in Washington, D.C. If you don't own a garage with your house in D.C., it's probably going to cost you $10,000 a year just to park there. So getting free parking, that's huge. Let's take a look at apportionments. That's where after they take the census, they redistribute the seats in the House based on how many people are going to be in that state and that area. They redraw those lines. The party with the majority control in North Carolina, that is the Republicans, control the General Assembly, which is Congress for North Carolina, if you will. They get to redraw the lines in North Carolina. This process of having that privilege of redrawing the line is called gerrymandering, and it gives a party a chance to win more elections. It's supposed to just give them a slight edge. But remember, I told you about how use of computers and internet data and all that stuff that they collect, they have been able to fine-tune that. And you can see where in 2010 they used a computer model to redistribute the lines, and this was the result. North Carolina actually got sued. They said that gerrymandering was actually fixing the game at this point when you use a computer to rig the system. And it was also, a lot of this was based upon racial identity. And they said basically the computer was racist when it actually redrew these lines. So they have been redrawing these lines several times. So far, the judge in the case has not been satisfied with those redraw lines. And here we are going into another census. There will be another chance for another redraw next year after the census is over. So we'll have to see how that works out again. Hopefully this time the computers will do a more fair redrawing of those lines and be a little less biased. We'll have to see. I'm sure plenty of people will be watching to see how it turns out. Let's talk about the power of Congress. Congress has power. Its main number one thing is to collect taxes and to borrow money to pay for all those acts and all the bureaucracy that runs our country. Everything from the military to the tax collector, the guy who actually collects your taxes to pay for the military and all the other expenses that we have. Besides making laws and making acts, Congress has a responsibility every spring to make a budget. That budget is supposed to be put in place by July 1st, before they go home for the summer. It has not been put in place in quite a while. Generally what ends up happening is these guys are passing temporary budgets to get from every 3 or 4 months to be able to pay for the government. They've been having a lot of fighting in Congress and not being willing to come to agreements on budget plans. It's going to be interesting with COVID-19 how that's going to affect the federal budget plan for this year as we come towards that season where the president should be giving his budget to Congress right now, and Congress should be working on a new budget in order to be able to have it on his desk for him to sign by July 1st. Remember, if they don't have it by July 1st, They have to come back after 4th of July and stay there until they get a budget or they agree upon some sort of temporary measure. That's always fun. Let's talk about the legislative powers. The power for the federal government. The legislature has the power to regulate trade, create economic systems, make immigration laws. We haven't made a new immigration law since 1984. They also, Congress is the only ones that have the power to declare war. The president can start it, but he can't keep fighting it without Congress giving him approval for a war. So the president has to go to Congress to ask them to declare war. Also issuing patents and copyrights. Why do we want that? Because we definitely do not want people running around trying to steal our individual rights and our designs and stuff as we invent things. By having it as a federal system, you have the power of the federal government not only to help you in the United States protect your rights, of ownership of your property. We're talking about property rights like if you design something or a building, they can't use it, that design or that invention without your permission, without giving you rights to it. They also gives the power of the U.S. government to help force countries who try to steal our intellectual property. So issuing patents by the federal government, that's powerful. The United States government has a powerful chunk of sway, not only in the United States, of course, but also in the world to help people keep people from having their intellectual property stolen from them. Let's talk about the non-legislative powers of Congress. The president and vice president, if there is no majority in the electoral college, remember that magic number for the president to get elected is 270. If the electoral college cannot give him more than 270 votes, then it goes to Congress to vote, and they will choose who will become the new president of the United States. It's happened a few times, most famously with Thomas Jefferson when John Adams ran for his second election. And lost to Thomas Jefferson. There was a guy named Aaron Burr. The three of them, none of them got the necessary votes, so it went to Congress to vote. And they did not vote it the way people thought it would, and ended up electing a Democrat by a Congress that was majority Republican, all because one person stood up and said not to elect Aaron Burr and definitely not to re-elect John Adams. So Thomas Jefferson. It happens. They also, anytime the president makes a confirmation for one of his appointments to either his cabinet or a member of the Supreme Court or any of the federal court judges, they are appointed by the President of the United States, but they must be confirmed through the House committee and then through the Senate must vote. The House does the investigation and the hearing, and then the Senate votes on it. So confirmation must go through the Senate. Process for amendments. Well, some of you guys missed this on the last one. Process for amendments. Well, they are introduced in the House. They can be introduced by a member of the House or the Senate. It must go through both the House and Senate and receive approval. Once it is approved by the House and the Senate and through Congress as a majority vote, then it goes to each state, and you must get at least 2/3 of the states, that's 37 of the 50, must confirm it. How do we confirm it? Well, in the state of North Carolina, it's pretty simple. They put it on the voting box, and the people of North Carolina take a vote on an amendment. And if we, majority, vote for an amendment, then North Carolina gives a thumbs up. If we vote it down, we give a thumbs down, and we need to be able to get those 37 states to approve to make an amendment to the Constitution. Once that happens, it becomes a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So House, Senate, vote by Congress, then to the individual states, and then once the states receive at least 37, that's 2/3 of the states approve it, then it then becomes an amendment. We've only had 27. There is a 28th one right now, but it's being challenged in the Supreme Court. Once that challenge is over with, we'll have a 28th Amendment. We talked about that in class. So, interesting stuff going on. Amendments do happen. They do emit, Congress does emit new states. It requires a unanimous vote by the Senate to introduce a new state into the United States. They must have a constitution, and it must be approved by Congress. So, and then the Senate takes a vote, and if it happens, we'll get another state. The only state we have territory we have looking at becoming a new state is Puerto Rico. You'll probably see it in your lifetime become a new state. Trying impeachment cases. Well, we've seen this. I will say that the last impeachment case was very confusing to most people, but think of it this way. You have a pre-trial in the House. There's basically just simply looking to see if there's enough suspicious evidence available to impeach a president and send him through the impeachment process. The actual trial takes place in the Senate, where witnesses are supposed to be called, and basically the 100 members of the Senate function as a court, and they are the jury. Donald Trump went through this process just recently, and he was found innocent. There was a vote against impeaching him. He was impeached by the House, so he'll always go down in the books as being sent through the impeachment process. However, he was found innocent. Basically, Congress, the Senate, stated that even though the information wasn't good and what he did wasn't good, it was not, to their opinion, a reason to remove him from office. So they voted against impeaching him. He was cleared of those charges. If he hadn't have been, they would have had two choices: sanctions or to remove him from presidency. They chose neither, obviously. The only president to ever be actually impeached is Bill Clinton, and he was sanctioned. Sanctioning is basically a formal declaration of wrongdoing. It's a slap on the wrist, but it will follow a president and their administration for the rest of their life. So when you look at Bill Clinton, you do a Google search on him, there will always be a mention of his impeachment there. Because he was impeached for lying to Congress. So those are the kind of things that you can see Congress have the power to do. The writ of habeas corpus. This is the right for people to prevent people from being held in jail without a formal trial. The writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in national emergencies. National emergencies such as a war. During World War II, habeas corpus was suspended. During the Civil War, habeas corpus was suspended. Basically what happened is people were thrown in jail. If they were non-violent offenses, most of the time the people that were thrown in jail were given a choice: join the army or stay in jail until the war was over. Most people chose to join the army. For those individuals that stayed in jail, they had to stay there until the war was over. And then for the writ of habeas corpus to be reinstituted, for them to get their day in court. That could have been a very long time. Case in point, we have been at war with the United States against terrorism since 2002. That is going on 18 years, ladies and gentlemen. So if the writ of habeas corpus had been suspended in 2002 and someone was put in jail, they wouldn't have gone to trial until the war was over. That could be 18 years. We've had wars that last much, much longer. So habeas corpus is important to have in place, but it can be suspended in the case of national emergencies. The bill of attainder. This is when a person is convicted without a trial. Probably most notably person that I know of that was convicted of a bill of attainder would have to be Snowden. Snowden was a guy in 2002, 2004, somewhere in that neighborhood, who leaked to WikiLeaks about the fact that the United States government was recording all your messages and your text messages and your cell phone calls and stuff. When he leaked that information out, he basically committed a crime and he fled the United States. He's been living, I think he's in Russia right now, living there in exile. He cannot come home. Since we couldn't try him, we tried him without him actually being here. Case was heard, everything was done. He's been found guilty. So if he ever steps foot on land that we can extradite him from, or he ever comes back to the United States, he immediately goes to jail. His trial has already happened. Ex post facto laws. You cannot be punished for a crime that may be illegal today, but wasn't illegal when you committed the crime. Keep that in mind. So if something come out new today that the government hadn't yet made a law on, whether it was legal or illegal, you can't be arrested later for breaking the law of something that wasn't illegal when you broke it. So, they can't turn back the time machine on you. So ex post facto laws. You cannot go back in time and punish someone for a crime they committed before it was a crime. That's not going to happen. Leadership. I put this guy up here. This is the former Speaker of the House, Republican from 2016 to 2018. Paul Ryan. He was a Tea Party member, and he was replaced when the Democrats retook control in 2018, and it went to Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, most powerful person. She is third in line to the presidency. She has a tremendous amount of power, whether a bill succeeds or fails. So keep that in mind. Who else do we need to know? Vice President functions as the President of the Senate, and because he has another job as Vice President, he can't always be there, there is a backup, Orrin Hatch. He serves as the President Pro Tem. President Pro Tem, right here. Make sure you remember that. Pro Tem. Orrin Hatch. He is the substitute president for when the Vice President cannot be the President of the Senate. I know it's a tongue twister, but remember, the Vice President of the United States is the President of the Senate. And because he can't be there, he has a sub, Orrin Hatch, and he's a Republican. Here are your floor leaders. Make sure you remember these guys. Most importantly, your majority leader and your minority leader. You have your majority leader, Mitch McConnell, Democrat. And you have the minority leader, Charles Schumer. So you have Mitch McConnell, the Republican majority leader in the Senate, and the Democrat minority leader, Charles Schumer. Here's your Republican, here's your Democrat. Leader, majority, minority. There's more Republicans in the Senate than there are Democrats. It's the other way around in the House. You have the Democrats are in charge in the House. So you have Steny Hoyer here as the majority leader of the Democrats. And of course you have Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy is a Republican, and he is the minority leader. These guys are so busy, they have to have help. So their help are called the whips. Now, all of these guys are called whips except for the majority Senate leader. His John Carney, he is the Republican assistant majority leader. He doesn't call himself a whip, but basically the idea of the whip is they whip everybody into shape. Make sure all the members of the party are where they're supposed to be, and that they vote on key positions and key issues together as a body. So these are the movers and shakers. If you're a member of Congress, these are the people you want to know. These are the people who are going to get you the votes you need. So take a look here. You have the minority whip, Richard Durbin. You have the majority House Democrat majority leader, whip, James Clyburn. And then, of course, you have the minority leader, Steve Scalise. These guys here are the movers and shakers, and the people that you need to get in touch with. Chances are you're not going to be able to see these guys, get to them or get a meeting with them very often. They're going to be extremely busy. And, of course, these guys are always going to be busy, and so is Nancy Pelosi. So the whips are the ones that are the most accessible. Make sure you guys know that. When looking at bills, when we're talking about power in Congress, you need to make sure that you understand the standing committees, the select committees, and joint committees. Understand how all this is put together. Remember that if you are in a standing committee, these are committees that meet all the time. They're usually talking about budgets and overview. They do oversight hearings for appointment of judges, budgets. They make sure that every dollar is being ticked off and counted for. A select committee is when something is too big or too special or too all-consuming, or something that doesn't quite fit into one of these standing committees, something special. You're going to have a select committee. That select committee is going to be set up when something doesn't fit or is too big for a standing committee. Joint committees are when something is so massive or so important that it needs to have input from both the House and the Senate. A very special issue indeed. Obamacare had a joint committee. Why? Because it was so massive, so important for America. You're going to have members of both the House and the Senate on that committee. So those type of things, those are the type of committees you need to make sure you understand the difference. Standing, permanent committees, always meeting, budgets, recommendations, spending money, approval hearings, those type of things. Select committees, special or too big. Something that is special or too big. And joint committees, super special. Something that is going to be so important it needs input from the very beginning on the House and the Senate. Express powers, this is just a review. Make sure you remember the express powers. These are the only things that Congress can do. The U.S. government is in charge of taxing, borrow money, commerce, declaring war, raising armies and navy. Those are really important. Make sure you remember that. We've covered it before. It's a review, but it's going to be in every section. So make sure you understand express powers. Implied powers, the elastic clause. How does stuff get in? Well, you have to ask yourself whether or not something is so important for the government to deal with. Was it necessary for them to deal with it? And were they the only ones that could handle it? Was whatever the problem was so important and so big that only the federal government could handle it? If so, then it is proper. Necessary, something devastating, proper. COVID-19 would come into this case. It is a national disaster. It is something that no state can handle on their own. Is it necessary for the U.S. government to do something to help alleviate and end COVID-19? Yes. Is it proper that the federal government be the one that does this? Absolutely. So it would definitely fall underneath the necessary and proper clause. So anything that the federal government is making right now, or rules or laws, it's falling underneath this necessary and proper clause. Let's keep going. Reserve powers. What do we need to know about reserve powers? Make sure you guys understand the reserve powers are something that belong only to states. This is just stuff that states are responsible for. The federal government lets the state deal with how they want to deal with it. It's why if you move from the state of Virginia to North Carolina, your classes might be different because they are in charge of their public education. The end result is a high school diploma, but when you take civics, or when you take AP calculus in North Carolina, may be different than when you take it in Virginia. So you might be a senior here or a junior here in North Carolina, but then when you go to Virginia, you're going to be in classes maybe with freshmen in some of your classes, because North Carolina may have had you take some of your classes later and Virginia took them earlier, or vice versa. So, North Carolina, Virginia, every state in America handles public education just a little bit differently. Building codes, just a little bit differently. Obviously, in California, you want your buildings to be able to shake with the earthquakes. And in Louisiana, you want to deal with floods. So the laws and the rules on how buildings are built, two different areas, two different reasons for building their codes differently. So how they do all that is left up to the states how to do it. They do have them, but it's left up to the state to decide how to do those things. Full faith clause. Just remember, all public property. My license to drive works in every state. My marriage license is valid in every state. When I leave Virginia, I still own land in Virginia, even though I'm not there, and North Carolina recognizes that. Remember all those things. Concurrent powers. Make sure you guys remember concurrent powers. These are the things that both the federal government and the state share, um, such as borrowing money, taxations, law enforcement, chartering banks, transportation, establishing courts. These are things